There's a 40% chance the policy will fail, and then you'll see a partial breakup of the single currency. And that is such a big risk that obviously it's a risk that businesses need to take quite seriously.
40%, if there is a partial breakup, what could be the economic and social consequences of that?
Well, to take a step back just for a second, we think that this breakup would probably involve the weaker so-called periphery countries leaving the Eurozone individually, probably in quite chaotic fashion, and that would eventually leave a northern core of stronger countries that are still within the Eurozone. But even if that happens, so it's not a full breakup. It's not like you're going to wake up one morning and suddenly there are 17 national currencies where once there was the euro. But even with this partial breakup, there would be very serious repercussions both for global financial markets and for the global economy.
And certainly for the stability potentially of Europe itself, if there is that sort of fracture between the weaker economies and the stronger one, that belt of northern economies, as you put it.
Yes, I mean, it would increase not only economic tensions but also political tensions. One good illustration of this is the fact that really we don't think it's in any country's economic interest to leave the Eurozone. So leaving the Eurozone would really be a political decision. So yeah, there's politics very heavily involved in this whole crisis.
Jake, where you said just before that you forecast that the leaders will probably do, quote, just enough to hold this all together. What is just enough, and when are they going to do this just enough, given all the talking that's taken place to date?
Well, you ask a very good question, because there's still a lot of uncertainty as to whether European policymakers will come up with a comprehensive package that is credible to markets. And credibility is really the key word here, because throughout the crisis we've seen that speaking and doing are not the same things. So even if they come up with a comprehensive agreement and there's some big announcement in the next day or so, there's still going to take a long time to implement these plans. It's going to be very difficult and take a lot of coordination and negotiating. And markets will be watching very carefully, because if there's even the slightest sign of slippage from that program, whatever the program is, markets will take fright.
From your knowledge and from all we've seen so far, what do you reckon the likelihood is that we will see anything resembling a comprehensive deal coming out of this latest meeting to be held overnight our time to try and tackle the crisis?
There's a lot of uncertainty and there are a lot of rumours circulating. It doesn't look great, to be honest. They're almost compelled to come up with a communique or announcement of some kind, just so that the whole summit doesn't come across as a failure. But I would be surprised if that announcement has enough details to really satisfy markets. I mean, it's difficult to say how markets would react initially. There may be a little bit of relief that they're doing something, but as I said before, the devil is really in the details and in the execution. As those details become clearer, hopefully, we'll just have to see how markets react.
Jake, our Prime Minister, Julia Gillard, spoke out in the last day or so, cautioning European leaders not to continue muddling through, to use the term you used before. And in fact, the IMF a couple of weeks ago came out saying, look, the cautious approach, the austerity measures, maybe not as good as pursuing stimulus packages, to be more proactive. So how difficult is it for the leaders to embrace the stimulus approach? How difficult is it for them to avoid this muddling through?
Well, it's extremely difficult for them to implement stimulus. A lot of people are now talking about the Eurozone crisis, comparing it to the crisis just after the collapse of Lehman Brothers in 2008. One of the big differences between then and now is that governments and policymakers really lack the financial firepower that they had in 2008. The need for austerity really constrains most governments' ability to apply stimulus, at least in Europe. You know, for an Australasian, Asian audience, things are a little bit different. Certainly we think that if there was a breakup of the Eurozone, that would be very negative for the global economy. Economies like China would have some capacity to launch new stimulus, but not on the same scale that was the case in 2008, 2009.
Tell us a bit more about your prognosis there with what this could potentially mean for the global economy if this comes to pass.
Well, just to give you an example, just last week we cut our forecast for growth in the Eurozone. So we now think the Eurozone will be in recession next year and they will contract by 0.3%. That's the no breakup scenario. If policy fails to really get a grip on the situation, obviously the number would be much worse. We think that if a partial breakup occurred, that would create a very deep recession in the Eurozone itself. It would also put the US into recession, we think. In financial markets, it would create a big retreat from risk. That would be bad for equities, it would be bad for commodities, it would be bad for most risk assets. So there would be really a lot of problems in the global economy and in financial markets if policymakers in Europe fail to get a grip.
Well, I'm sure the whole world is hoping that scenario doesn't come to pass. Jake Statham from the Economist's Intelligence Unit out of Hong Kong, I thank you for your time tonight.